My name is Elizabeth Burdock, and like you said, some of you may know me as Witch Betty. My talk today is called Roots of Resistance, How Reconnecting with Nature Restores Freedom. So I've never done this before. I've never stood on a stage talking to people. I've actually never even worn a headset like this. I'm, I'm not a scholar. I'm not a guru. I'm not a member of the academy. I'm just a person who lived a lot of my life in fight or flight. And I survived because I made a conscious decision to fight. I'm a naturalist content creator, which sounds a little bit weird, but I create content for internet platforms teaching about like plant relationships and how to stay closer to nature. I feel the best way to teach you or tell you about how I made these relationships with plants is to overshare a little bit about where I came from. I was raised on a place called Bowen Island, which is a little island. Yay! It's a little island in British Columbia. And when we moved there, I'm not even going to say when, but it was a while ago. But there was about 800 or so people that lived there. And we lived in an even more rural part of this rural island. It was really rare that I saw anyone, and exceptionally rare if I met anyone in my own age group. You see, I'm naturally feral. I was then, and as you can see now, barefoot and unsupervised. Growing up in this way, though, it did allow me to let my imagination run my vessel. And so I built forts, I played with sticks, I made up all sorts of games just like in the forest by myself. My dad did show me how to keep my orientation in the bush, so even though I was unsupervised, I wasn't getting lost. And he showed me my first edible plants and berries. But then eventually I had to start public school. And if any of you know what that's like, it can be tough. The kids taught me really, really quickly that I was different, and they treated me as such. And this started a lifelong struggle for me. But one thing stayed the same. Was then and am now most comfortable in the forest. But it's hard for me to articulate exactly how I felt, but there's a poem that I'd love to share with you that does it better for me. So I hope you don't mind me sharing this. This is Breathe by Becky Hemsley. She sat at the back and they said she was shy. She led from the front and they hated her pride. They asked her advice and then questioned her guidance. They branded her loud and then were shocked by her silence. When she shared no ambition, they said it was sad. So she told them her dreams and they said she was mad. They told her they'd listen and they covered their ears. And they gave her a hug as they laughed at her fears. And she listened to all of it, thinking she should be the girl they told her to as best as she could. But one day she asked what was best for herself, instead of trying to please everyone else. So she walked to the forest and she stood with the trees. She heard the wind whisper and danced with the leaves. She spoke to the willow and the elm and the pine, and she told them what she'd been told time after time. She told them that she felt we moved a lot in my younger years. We started on Bowen and we went to England and then to Vancouver and then back to Bowen again. This only exasperated my struggle to connect. I felt lucky when I had one friend, and it was rare more than that. Eventually, I started rebelling and I chose flight. By 14, as you know, I was living on my friends' couches, I was running away, I turned to some drugs, I dropped out of school, and I went to the streets. But these adventures did lead me to finding people who were a little bit more like me. And it also showed me what scarcity really looked like and what hunger feels like. By the time I was 18, I'd made a little tribe of friends and I had a boyfriend, and we moved to Vancouver Island. But when we got there, we had no food, we had no skills, we had no money, and we needed food. And I looked around and I was like, this place is lush, it's temperate, and everything here looks like food to me. Like, why can't we eat for free? And, you know, on a visit to my parents' house, I found a book on their bookshelf called Wild and Edible Plants of Bowen Island, and I took it with me. My plant journey really began here, not just out of interest, but also out of a need for survival and sovereignty. This path isn't easy, though, especially with the lesson that I know so many people have been taught, because I was, that all plants and mushrooms can be dangerous and can likely kill you. So little exercise. Show of hands, how many people here have resisted foraging or still resist it based on that fear? Yeah, there's a bunch of us. It was me too. It's hard to shake, right? But we're told that this lesson is there to protect us, because that's why my parents taught it to me. But sadly, it also breeds nature phobia. A lot of people say things to me like, oh, you spend so much time in the forest by yourself. Are you not afraid? Like there could be large animals. Again, there's poisonous plants and berries. But what I realized is the most dangerous animal I've come in contact with is standing right here on this stage. And I don't see a lot of us in the forest, so I always feel kind of comfortable. I also can't help but consider that there's something else at play, that they teach us this to keep us in a system that so many of us can never conform to. A type of colonization to keep us separate from nature and locked in like cogs in a machine. An example of this actually exists in our dictionary. The definition of nature is as follows: the phenomena of the physical world collectively, especially plants and animals, and other features of the earth, as distinct from human creations. So take a second to digest that. As distinct from human creations. To me, this is proof that we live in a world that is teaching and keeping us separate from nature. And I don't know about you, but I can feel that I am as much a part of nature as any other plant or animal that I've ever come in contact with. So when I was 8, I had a best friend, and her name was Anna. And she lived on the Capilano Reservation in North Vancouver, and she's a member of the Squamish Nation. And this is an Indigenous people, the Coast Salish people in Vancouver, where we live. And this is a favorite period in my childhood. They taught me about community, culture, and ceremony. These are different teachings than I learned in school. They taught me that everything has a spirit. Not just us, but like the sky, the water, the plants, even the rocks have consciousness and should be respected as such. It was pretty confusing being taught by our schools, the institution of learning, that all of these things are inanimate. I was taught to ignore everything, every feeling I had of connection, except for a desire to have more than I need. But here we are, right? We're all pushing back and we're choosing to fight. So it's not just us, though, of course. People everywhere want change. And the problems can feel really big, which makes me feel really small. So I suggest that we start small at home with what goes in our bodies and on our tables. I'm going to try not to preach to the choir too much here, but food security is the ability to have physical, social, and economic access to safe and nutritious food. This keeps our bellies full. But food sovereignty is all of that, with the supreme authority to govern ourselves without external control. This keeps our bellies full, but it also keeps our hearts, our hands, and our communities full, and we can honor our cultural and our human rights. Many things affect food security: inflation, weather, politics, disease. So to be secure, we must take control in our homes and our communities of how and who controls our food. I'm noticing many restrictions coming more common in parts of the world. Like collecting rainwater is illegal in some states, even on your own property. Not paying for power, trying to create your own power, solar, if you're not giving back to the grid. I've heard of people losing their property or being fined or whatever. And foraging is restricted for some good reasons like conservation, but also safety, commercial interest, protection, and even aesthetic values. So how do we move forward to a culture that values sovereignty in this way? Well, we can encourage ethical practices, like ethical foraging practices. We can even encourage conscious disobedience when laws prohibit us from exercising our human rights. George R. Orwell wrote in the novel 1984, "Until they become conscious, they will never rebel. And until they rebel, they will never become conscious." So it's time we wake up, right? Instead of teaching fear, let's teach these safe practices. Instead of saying, "Hey, don't drink that water from that stream, it's untreated, it's going to make you sick," let's say, "Let's take this water and go boil it for 3 to 5 minutes, and it can be safe to drink." Or we can make and learn how to make water filtration systems from found objects. In fact, if you look at your programs on January 31st at 10:30 a.m., Patrick will be doing a talk about exactly this, so we can even learn it here. Instead of "don't touch mushrooms, they're all going to try to kill you," we can teach that the difference between something nutritious and something poisonous is as easy as learning the difference between cabbage and lettuce. And we can also learn that you can, in fact, touch and smell any mushroom, even the most poisonous in the world, without any harm. Just please don't ingest them. If your parents taught you to fear the unfamiliar, they likely taught this to you too. So let's unlearn this generational fear and reconnect to our ancestral knowledge, because this is our birthright. I know, it seems like a tall order. And this is why I'm here. I'd like to offer you some easy and digestible ways to begin exactly as I did. I believe that the first step is to really demystify our surroundings, unlearn that nature phobia and the fear of the unknown with gentle exposure. Set aside time daily, if you can, to be outside in nature, even if it's just 10 minutes a day, but with intention. Don't just go outside and be like, "Oh man, I should be checking those emails. I don't know where the kids are. I did do those things." Like, take that time to clear your mind. You can use the 5-4-3-2-1 grounding technique. This is 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. So look carefully at something you haven't noticed before, or look differently at something you know well. But pick things up, hold them in your hand, feel their textures, their weights, their temperatures. Smell the air. What do you notice? Does it smell sweet? Can you smell the leaves? Can you smell the dirt, or even if the rain is coming? Listen to your surroundings. Listen to the closest sounds to you and then the furthest away sounds. How are they similar? How are they different? Identify the sounds if you can. How many do you hear? Then be daring and taste something. Now again, don't ingest things that you don't know. That can be dangerous. But you can literally like walk right up to a tree and give it a good lick, or pick up a rock and taste it. Because what do you notice? Is it what you expected? But this activity will drop you in. It's going to balance your nervous system. Your breathing will calm. Your blood pressure will regulate. And you're going to remember what you already know. And that's that we're not separate from nature. We're all a part of this together. Now that the relationship with yourself and your surroundings has deepened, it's a really good time to try to make a relationship with a plant. Start with something that you know, something simple, like even dandelion, and find a rosette or a patch. Decide and promise to care for that plant. Clear the space around it, decorate, but inspect it thoroughly and look at differently. Like, what are the shape of the leaves? Does the stem have hair? What stage is it in its growth? Is it flowering, seeding? Is it budding? Bring a notebook and write it all down. The location, the season, the date, the time. You can sketch it. And if that's uncomfortable, you could always take a photo and add it to your notebook later. But come back often and repeat this process. If it's distressed, try to help it. You can listen to it, you can smell it, you can inspect it, but document it. When you get home, research it. Use Google. If you have books on plants, look it up. You can learn its scientific, or as I like to say it, sciencey name. You can learn its uses, its folklore, its history. And then you could go online and you could search and see if there's any Witch Betty videos about it. Follow this plant for an entire year. You'll know then if it's annual or perennial. And it'll teach you the best time to use each part of this plant. Like you're going to see, well, when it's flowering, I can use the flower. Or like with stinging nettle, I've learned that the best time to use the rhizome, which is the runner root, is in the spring, right before it's throwing up its plants, because it's holding the most medicine then. You can do this with multiple plants in a year. You don't have to just focus on one, but don't overload yourself, because you're going to want to absorb what they teach you. Because these plants are going to start talking to you now, because they know you're listening. They're going to be like, hello, hi, I'm a plant. You see me? I'm a plant. So try to stay focused if you can. And after you've observed it for a full year, sometime around the anniversary is usually when I start to feel confident to use the plant for food, medicine, textiles, dye, and even ceremony. But at this point, you've made a relationship with this plant. You can trust yourself and you can trust the plant. Of course, this is only one way of many to make a relationship with the plant. There's classes, there's workshops, there's guided walks, and there's even degrees that you can pursue to get you a similar result. Now, if fear is still something that's coming up for you, that's okay. There's another way to do this. And you could just start researching and learning the most poisonous plants in your area. So simple online searches will tell you where you live and what the most poisonous plants are in that area. Then go out into the forest or whatever your landscape may be and see if you can find them and get to know those ones first. Because then you can always know what isn't poison hemlock and isn't a death cap mushroom. You could be like, I don't know what this is, but I can tell you what it isn't. And that's going to make you feel safer. But one thing, again, the same, is this is the way to true freedom over our food in the way that nature intended it. Will we get everything we need just foraging our areas? It's not super likely. But if you get good at foraging morels or chanterelles, you can trade those with farmers or fishermen and artisans. You can also preserve them and save and store enough to supplement your food bills for an entire year. But taking the sting out of it financially is really only the beginning of what connecting to the natural world in this way is going to do for you. It fills our pantry, of course, but it also renews our mental and our physical health in ways that are harder and harder to find in the modern world. One of the first plants I ever foraged and I come back to religiously is the stinging nettle. When I was 6 years old, I lived in England and I was riding my bike with some kids. I was wearing my pink gingham summer uniform. And as we're riding along, one of the kids says, "Hey, watch out for the nettles." And I didn't know what he was talking about, but I pretended I did. And I turned around, likely with a smart mouth remark. Turning around riding a bicycle made me turn my wheel. I hit a bump and I landed in that patch of nettles. Now these gingham uniforms, they're short-sleeved, I was bare-legged. The pain was excruciating and unforgettable. But one thing I can say is I never struggled again to identify a stinging nettle. And I could see this plant from miles away. I felt like I knew it intimately. And I avoided it because I thought it was evil. Until one of these times of scarcity that I spoke about earlier, I wanted to go to a potluck. And I didn't have any food or money to go to the potluck, and I didn't want to show up empty-handed. And a girlfriend I had who was older than me and probably a little more hippie than I was, she was like, you can still go. Just go out and trim some of the nettles, steam them, and take them as a side dish. I was just like, hold the phone, lady. Are you telling me we can eat these things? And at this moment, though, this completely changed my relationship with the plant. And today, the sting doesn't even bother me. I use every part of the plant. And when I was introduced to kimchi, which was later in life than you might imagine, I thought, why are we only using cabbage to make this plant? Do you think we could use nettles? And that became my favorite recipe that I use with nettles. And fermented foods are amazing for our gut microbiome. They're full of lactobacillus bacteria, and nettles are in fact a superfood. They're full of amino acids, which are the building blocks to all the proteins that make up what we are as people. They improve our digestion, nutrient absorption, they reduce inflammation, they support our immune and our endocrine health, and they boost mood and health through the gut-brain connection. Sorry, I just got over a flu. So our gut-brain connection is directly related to homeostasis. That's the system that regulates, everything in our bodies. Our hydration, our blood sugar pressure, our stress hormones. In fact, 90% of serotonin, one of our happy chemicals, is created in our gut. But homeostasis isn't just an ideal state of being, right? It's our body doing the best that it can with what we feed it to find balance. So if we eat fast food and candy all the time, we're going to just crave fast food and candy. Because our body, again, is trying to find balance, not perfection, just balance. So when we start feeding it real food, wild food, it remembers. Our mind clears, our cravings change. I believe these plants are trying to talk to us if we could just learn how to listen. They talk to me by landing me in a giant patch of them so that I would never forget who they are, and then later save me from malnutrition and quite possibly some social inequities. And like me, next thing you know, you're that person who gets super excited about a plant that once violently assaulted you. Something that I think is overlooked is the connection between food sovereignty and community. Sovereignty can be easily mistaken for individuality or self-reliance, but it's deeply rooted in collective care, shared knowledge, and mutual dependence. Sovereignty isn't just about food. It's about power, care, and belonging. This naturally builds and strengthens community. It's also going to push back against that elite plan of divide and conquer. A community that grows its own food can decide what is culturally appropriate, and it can share this knowledge for generations. It's a radical move away from allowing corporations and distant systems from having this power over us. Because food is our most universal bond, right? Like if we go on a date, we're going to have a meal. When we celebrate, we feast. And community builds when we cook together, we share meals, we feed each other in times of need. Because food carries memory, culture, and story. Food sovereign communities can respond better to crisis, natural disasters, supply chain interruptions, climate events. We have better ability to care for our elders and our underrepresented vulnerable people. When we naturally rebel against and reduce dependence against extractive systems. So I'd like to offer some practical ways to build community within food sovereignty. We start with community gardens and food forests. This offers shared responsibility, connection to the land, and shared harvests. Seed sharing circles or events. This is a great way to share knowledge, and it's also one of the only ways I've had the opportunity to learn from elders because it wasn't something that I was offered. One time I lived on this island called Denman Island, which is another one of those little islands in BC. And I went to one of these events and I brought some squash seeds and I was all excited to trade with someone and I'd grown them. And I went up to this woman and I was like, I would like to trade my squash seeds for your beans. And she's like, oh, okay. What kind of squash do you have? And I said, I have some butternut squash and some spaghetti squash. And she's like, and you grew these? I said, I did. She said, and you grew them beside each other? I was like, yeah. And she's like, well, neither of those are those seeds. What you have there is a frankenseed. And I was a little bit like embarrassed or whatever, but she was kind and she gifted me new squash seeds and the bean seeds. And we became good friends. And she actually turned out to be my neighbor. Community kitchens and potlucks. Potlucks and that stuff, it's going to break isolation, especially in the winter months. And like I said before, it's how I learned that I could even eat stinging nettles. It also builds trust in our neighbors and ourselves. We learn new recipes, traditions, we strengthen bonds. free and affordable workshops. I'm a terrible gardener, if you can't tell from my stories, and that's why I forage. And now learning that foraging and being able to share that with all of you has landed me in this beautiful country on this stage where I get to both share and learn from all of these amazing people. Food sovereignty builds community by restoring collective control over nourishment, reconnecting us to our land and our culture, transforming food from commodity to shared responsibility. But any of us can do this. We can learn to share it on large platforms like I do, or you can share it at home in your communities. Because the biggest thing I'd love you to take away from this is that there are no chosen ones, only those of us who choose. Thanks so much for being here, everyone. I appreciate all of you. And honestly, when it comes down to it, we've got this. Peace.